Welcome to the Freedom Founder Podcast. I'm your host, Zach Duggar. Now, when I was in elementary school, we got our first Nintendo. I spent several hours, multiple different times and seasons in my life playing Nintendo, playing Sega, playing video games, and my dad told me it was a waste of time. Now, that said, the video game industry is well over $100 billion per year in annual revenues. Now, my guest today, John Krajewski, is a part of the video game industry. He started off working for other companies, and then in 2009, he founded his own company, Strange Loop Games. John, thank you for joining me today.
My pleasure, Zach. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Now, when you got into video games, perhaps even stepping back, as a young child, were you always interested in video
Oh, yeah.
games, gaming? Okay.
I was obsessed ever since I was a kid. Even before my parents would buy me Nintendo, I made Zelda on like pen and paper and pretended to play. And
Okay.
yeah, just kind of kept that obsession as I grew up and turned it into my hobby and then into my career and then
Okay.
into my company. So I think having that at an
Awesome.
early age was really helpful.
Yeah. Now, most people, when they are having a passion early on in their lives, they something like that. Let's say it seems like it's more of a hobby, and a lot of people will push against that, like, yeah, there's no future in that, and they may then deter them from going down that path. Did you have anyone in your life that was like, no, I don't think that's really a pursuit that you should follow?
Not really. Actually, my dad was really supportive of it. He got
Nice.
me like Commodore 64 and like programming books.
Okay.
I mean, he'd kind of see the writing on the wall that like computers are going to be huge. And if I'm like
Yep.
obsessed with games, I'm obsessed with computers. So there was that natural connection there. But yeah,
Excellent.
fortunately, it's something that's really grown into a massive industry, as you said, and it's just getting
Yeah.
bigger too.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's been so many advances over time, just in the time frame that we've been alive, really, just to see the maybe the early. We had an Atari at some point. We had a Nintendo,
Mhm.
Commodore 64. I think we might have had that at one point. I might have played Space Invaders, maybe, if that was what it was, if I recall.
Mhm. Mhm.
But man, it is definitely something that has advanced significantly over time.
Yeah, and not just like in terms of the raw graphics and power, which is like photorealistic now,
Yeah,
but also just in like the variety and like the medium as an art form. Like
sure.
there's so many interesting like types of ways to play games, on different platforms. User generated content is becoming huge, so players are becoming creators themselves.
Yeah,
And yeah, it's just really emerging as like the dominant medium for this century, I think. And we're just going to keep see that accelerating.
yeah, absolutely. Now, when you got started in the industry, I briefly referenced that, but you did not immediately out of the gate start your own company. Talk a little bit about your experiences before Strange Loop Games.
Sure. Yeah. So I worked, I went to University of Washington, studied computer science,
Okay.
and I got an internship at a company called Wild Tangent, which was doing like web games at the time.
Yep.
And then after I graduated, I went to work for Midway, which is, a big studio that's been around for forever. And then I went to EA, which is another big studio. So I had about 8 years in the traditional kind of games industry before I started my business. And so during that
Okay.
8 years, you're building your skills, understanding how the whole industry works. If you're paying lots of attention, that's all going to be really useful when you start your own business. And also just building your network. I mean, that's obviously one of
Yeah.
the most important things. Is like, the people I started my company with were people that I worked with prior. So building that network out is a really nice way to do it. I think if I had started it just out of college, I mean, you get a head start, but it's also more challenging just because you don't have the knowledge, you don't have the network.
Yep.
You got to do all the like learning yourself versus kind of getting paid to do that learning.
Yeah.
So it worked out well for our position.
Now, did you do any period of time where you were overlapping getting your company started while you were still working for these others?
Yeah, well, like a lot of people in the game industry, I had my hobby project. So
Okay.
as I was working at
Yep.
these companies, I just had like my little background hobby
Yeah.
game that I was making. And over the years, I just kept adding to it and adding to it. And it got to the point where it's like, you know what, this is getting to be pretty cool. What if I just quit my
Yeah.
job and just like fully dedicated myself to this? So that was the point that I like turned it into a company and went from being like a
Yeah.
hobby to like my main project. So yeah, there was that ramp up time of like a couple of years actually.
Okay. All right. So I was talking to somebody the other day who they shifted from working in a corporate job to then deciding to do something using technology, but an online type business. But that required some time and then cutting back on expenses, and they had to move in with family during that time frame. Did you have to make
Mhm.
any adjustments in your life at that point when you shifted into starting your company and moved out of
Yes.
working for EA
Yes.
Sports?
I actually, well, I
Yeah.
saved up a bunch before I made that jump and then
Yep.
basically just decided to live really cheaply. So
Okay.
living off credit cards and ramen, basically.
Okay.
And I was
Yep.
roommating with my co-founder at the time.
Yep.
So that was kind of the route we took it. I mean, there's other ways to do it. Like probably a little later in my career, I would have been able to get funding because I'd had a
Okay.
little more experience. But I was kind of at that point where like I had to like bootstrap it myself, just because I hadn't had that level of experience that people would give me money yet.
Okay.
Um, and yeah, it worked out for us though.
Yeah. No, dig into that a little bit more in regards to funding for something like a video game project or something in the technology world. I hear about, first round of funding, second round of funding. We got more from these venture capital funds. So how is that compared to the way that you got started?
Right. So yeah, I mean, our approach is kind of called bootstrapping, where we just
Okay.
start with no money and we just put
Yep.
sweat equity in. So basically, it was me and my co-founders. I was working full time, just living cheap. My co-founder was
Yeah.
too, and then we had a couple other people who were working part time on the project. And we basically spent like a year like that until we got the game to a point where we could show it to a publisher and they
Okay.
would fund us. So we got publisher funding, which is kind of like the
Okay.
the book model where they just give you money based on the project.
Hmm.
It's not equity dilutive, so they're not investing in the
Okay.
company. They're more just like
Yeah.
investing in the project.
Okay.
So that kind of got us to the next stage. We got our first game out. It makes some money. We put that into the next one. We do some contract work. So just kind of a variety of like different like bootstrapping, stepping it up, kind of growing that snowball, versus the other approach of like raising venture capital or something like that. So we're
Yeah.
actually starting that right now. We're raising. I'm talking to VCs and we're looking to do a round for our what we want to make next.
Okay.
And yeah, it's a different beast, but it was less of an option back when we were first starting. There weren't many like gaming
Hmm.
VCs, but now
Okay.
the games industry is just so massive that there's lots of them. So it's a lot more viable these days to do that.
Yeah.
But they are looking for a particular type of thing. They want that hockey stick exit. They want to see like, is this a game that's just going to grow linearly, or do you have something about it that's going to make it go like
Sure.
exponential so they can get the returns that venture capital needs. So they like
Yeah.
platforms, they like tools, they like things that like can scale like infinitely like that. So
Okay.
framing kind of what we want to build in that respect for VCs has been kind of the key for this next stage for us.
Okay. Yeah, yeah. Whereas you are needing it to support yourselves and, of course, wanting to make additional money over time, a venture capitalist funding option, they really need to see that accelerate for their investors that are giving funds for them to then give to you
Yeah.
guys.
Yeah.
Okay,
Totally.
that makes sense. Now, when you started Strange Loop Games, it was just you and your co-founder, and then you said you had some others that were coming alongside and helping in the projects. What
Hmm.
what type of games were you guys focused on at the start? What was your first project?
Hmm. This was back in 2009. So this was kind of the like indie games are really just taking off. So
Okay.
if you wanted to build an indie game, puzzle platformer, it was called Vessel, and it was built on this physics simulation of like liquid. So you could take like
Okay.
liquid like flow in the game, you could turn it into these creatures that were then animated and would like move around. It could melt and reform and stuff. So it's really a unique kind of characters and like systems we had in the game.
Yep.
And that was our main focus. I mean, it took a lot of work because we had to build our own engine. This was before like Unity and Unreal were big options, which are now the main game engines people work in. So
Okay.
that just takes a lot of time. Then we built a whole like physics engine and like the AI for these characters. So it was a
Okay.
pretty big investment that these days it's a lot easier to get started in games because there's such great tool sets available for free. Like anyone can just go
Okay.
download Unity and make something on their phone in like a day.
Yeah.
So yeah, back then it was it was less crowded because it was harder, but it was also just like a lot of work, getting
Yeah.
that
Right.
snowball going.
Yeah. So there's some of the systems that are available now that make it more efficient or less coding, perhaps
Mhm.
make it a lot easier for somebody to make something in a simple level at least. How
Yeah.
how does that work with regards to the competition now as you've gotten to this point where there is a little more involvement, more people that have some interest and are engaging in this video game design and trying to make it in this market?
Yeah, there's hundreds of thousands of games on mobile now,
Yeah,
and just it's a very crowded space. So like it used to be that you just make a game and it would stand out because there weren't all that many games out there.
right.
But now that you've really got to think about your marketing and the design of the game of like how does the design of this product promote its own marketing. So for us, that's multiplayer is a huge part
Okay.
of that because
Hmm.
if you play a game and you're like, oh, I want my friends to join me, then you have this natural inclination to like tell people and invite them, and it
Yep.
adds to the experience to them. So the more that you can kind of build that into the game, the better positioned you are against competition because it's all about just like getting the word out, getting people to talk about it, getting people to like be engaged enough that they are like your promoters kind of, especially as an indie operation where if we didn't, we don't
Yeah.
have a marketing budget when we started.
Yep.
So yeah, that was really key in a lot of our decision making about what type of game we want to make. Is like, how do we make it market itself?
Oh yeah. No, that makes sense. And having it be something that multiplayer option creates that in the built-in opportunity for it to be marketed by the individual players while they were engaging in play. They check out this game. Hey man, you can join me. Let's get this together.
Exactly, exactly. You have that route for them to like expose it to their friends. And these days, the streamer audience is also super key. So like on
Okay.
Twitch, people will
Yeah.
play games, just people just watch. It's like millions of kids, and not everybody knows this, but like Twitch is like the fourth biggest website, and millions of people just watch people play video games. And that's a huge vector. That's kind of like all of our marketing is coming through that. Is people like a famous streamer will play Eco,
Wow.
and suddenly our sales are 10x in France. I'm like, what's going
Okay.
on? Oh, there's some French streamer who's playing our game. So
Right.
making the game like great to be streamed and watched is another way to kind of activate your marketing that way.
Okay. And video games and really technology software, it's an international market, but it also makes it so your workforce can also be international. Now, how does working with individuals internationally in remote locations work for Strange Loop as you've grown and had to add in additional individuals? What are the advantages and disadvantages there?
Yeah, so we originally started. We were kind of on two continents to begin with.
Okay.
'Cause I was in Seattle, and my co-founder Malenko was in Australia. So we
Okay.
started off kind of split, but then we had a Seattle office for a while, and we did that for several years, which is great to have like everybody able to like talk and be in the same room.
Yep.
But then right before COVID, kind of coincidentally, we just decided to go a lot more global. So we got rid
Yeah.
of our office. Everybody works online now, and we started hiring internationally too. So we hire
Okay.
people who are
Hmm.
players of the game. So because we had the game out there, we
Yeah.
had lots of people who were like, "Hey, I love this game, and I'm a programmer. I'd love to like help you out." Some people would just like we'd share our source code, so they just get in there and start fixing bugs. And
Yep.
I'm like, you want a job? Like you're doing a pretty good job here already. We can start paying you for this." So we started hiring internationally. We're currently 32 people in 26 different countries.
Okay.
So yeah, so we have a lot of time zones to manage. I mean, that's always a challenge.
Yep.
the way we approach that is we kind of have we've formed sub teams that are in similar time zones, so you're
Okay.
usually overlapping. Meetings, like doing our all hands meeting, there's no time where it's not like 3 a.m. for somebody.
Sure.
So some people just have to watch the recording for that later, or we'll do multiple meetings. So
Yep.
there's a couple of trade-offs you got to think about when you're hiring globally like this, but then there's really good advantages. Like our hiring pool is now the whole world,
Yeah.
right? Whereas, and we're exposed to countries that have much lower cost of living, so we can much more effectively spend. We can pay them what's an awesome salary in
Hmm.
like Poland or Kazakhstan, and for us, it's like way cheaper than we would have to pay when we're competing
Yeah.
with Google over here. So it's a win-win for both of us. So
Absolutely.
there's lots of opportunities like that happen from the global approach, and it's been good. I mean, one of the biggest challenges is like you got to rethink how you build culture.
Hmm.
This is kind of something I just learned over the past few years, and just that value of culture, and that by default it's not necessarily gonna happen. You kind of need to like think about, how do I craft a really good culture? It's a lot easier when everybody's in person talking to each other, but it does have such an impact on the business. It's kind of what we
Yeah.
do is we try to do it online, where we have a Discord server, which is just a chat room where everyone can get in there and interact with each other. And we play online games together, so we can kind of connect
Okay.
in that respect. But
Yep.
just finding ways to like foster communications between people. We play the game together, we play other games together. It actually becomes really important.
Yeah. Yeah. Just to get continued engagement. You don't have that direct in-person engagement per se, but you have that ongoing engagement and in an activity that you can enjoy and relate to one another with, it sounds like.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So you mentioned the game Eco. Was that
Mhm.
the game that really brought the biggest launch for Strange Loop?
Yeah, this has been our biggest success. We've
Okay.
done about 6 games, and Eco is the one that's really most resonated with players. It's our main like multiplayer game. It's moddable, so players can kind of make their own mods. So there's
Okay.
all these communities. There's like thousands of communities that players host their own worlds and build out these amazing like civilizations in them.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I could share a screen. You want me to share the visual on there? Or?
Oh, yeah. I mean, if you can, absolutely. That would be great. I'd love to see it. It's something that I think over time I've seen my I don't play video games presently that much. A little bit with my son here and there, but he loves to play Rocket League. Rocket
Mm,
League is a game that he can go in and he can create these different cars, and then he can add more money, so it's something that he can modify to a certain
yeah,
extent. But I love this
personalize it.
concept of a game that you can continue to enjoy and modify and change over time, as opposed to those early games that I enjoyed playing. But if you've completed those levels and you've beat the game, got to the final boss, then
Yeah,
where do you go from there? You
and
can
that's it,
replay if you
right?
want. So yeah, so let's share a little bit of this now for those that are going to be listening to this. We're going to have to talk a little bit about the elements because they won't have that visual to see it.
Yeah, sure. But yeah, to your point of, games have much more customizability. Like I love Rocket League for that. You can really customize your cars and everything.
Yeah.
In our game Eco, you are basically customizing a whole world where you're with other people. So
Okay.
you're building up this society from scratch. Like you start from this pure just wilderness, and you have to take resources from the environment in order to create your civilization. But in the process of that, you can actually impact the environment. So you can, chop down too many trees, you can make species go extinct, you can actually damage or pollute it.
Okay.
So you
Yep.
have to understand this impact you're having and make decisions as a group. And you do that with a government. So you can create a government in the game that makes laws, makes regulations, and it's all with real people forming together. So you
Yeah.
get these just really interesting interactions that are, different every time, because people have different ideas how to approach things, different kind of conflicts arise,
Yep.
and you're trying to achieve this end level goal of shooting a meteor down.
Okay.
So you have to build like industry, technology, research to stop this disaster from happening, where everybody kind of has a part to play in that. So you have to trade, you have to have your own kind of niche, but it really involves everybody and kind of unites people together. It's really just like virtual society idea is what we're doing.
Yeah. No, I love that. And then it also seems that there's some elements in there about the environment and
Mhm.
consideration of the global environment in which we live.
Yeah, exactly. So the whole game runs on a simulation that we coded up, which is
Okay.
basically using like ecological principles, simulating populations, how they're impacted by like loss of habitat or
Hmm.
pollution. So the visuals here, you can see we expose the graphs of all that to players so they can see like what's happening with the different animal populations, what's the CO2 level, is going to make sea levels rise. So you can view all that data and then use it to make decisions.
Okay.
For example, you can pass laws. So, like, if a law is passed, then it will prevent players from violating it on the server. And this law, you got to like run it through elections and get it approved by your government. So it's this really powerful way to like make decisions as a group. This is an example of our law interface here, where you can tag it onto different actions, and then like here, if you chop down a tree that's an old growth redwood species, and you're not a federal civil servant, then it's prevented. So this is like a script. The players actually
Yep.
like script the civics of
Yep.
this world. So super
Okay.
fascinating what they build.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really unique, and there's depth to that consideration, not just here's this place you're working in, but you can actually take these simulations and identify, okay, if you do this, then this does occur, and that's the impact that you
Hmm.
have. Wow.
Yeah, exactly. You're much more tied to the consequences of your actions, which I think is really powerful, just in like a human sense. There's stakes to the
Hmm.
game that like you can lose this world.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Um, I'm gonna go ahead and drop it back to just us here,
Sure.
um, as I saw a little bit of delay in the video for those that are watching. Some delays on my side, at least. But how is it then? You mentioned the in regards to the working in a global environment with your team, and I know that there is an important part of a business, the leadership and the creativity that you have to be able to continue to move that vision forward. How do you operate that as a CEO and co-founder of this company? Um, because I think of myself. I did not go into business. You studied computer science, so
Mhm.
taking a step back and considering like how did you have to develop in those skill sets to be a leader and develop that creative vision and maintain that leadership with a global team to be able to
Yeah.
move the vision of Strange Loop forward?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's a lot of ways to kind of approach that. And the way that I approached that was just kind of proving myself first, of like spending years coding up this hobby project,
Yeah.
in my spare time, to the point where it's like, I have this. It's like, okay, you can make something cool that people are interested in. So the proof is in the pudding in that way.
Yep.
So I think of finding a way to like, what is it that differentiates you? What is it you can do that like is extraordinary? And then being able to like show that gives you a lot of credibility in terms of
Okay.
like raising funding or like finding team partners. So yeah, I think you kind of got to know yourself and know what your strengths are and know what your
Hmm.
weaknesses are, and then find people who can cover those weaknesses. But
Yep.
or just keep developing them, because like my background is, like you said, programming. But then when I
Hmm.
start my own company, now I'm doing a bit of everything. I'm doing the business side, I
Right.
have to hire people, I have to figure out the finances, and the
Yep.
design side too, which is a whole nother can of worms.
Right.
So I had to expand a lot of my skills, and I like it, but it's challenging that you don't have someone like telling you what to do anymore. It's like
Sure.
when I was working at EA, I just kind of naturally absorbed all kinds of learning just because I'm around other really smart
Yep.
people. But now I'm like starting my company, I'm alone, or there's a couple people and they're not working in the areas that we need to master. So it takes a lot more just energy of like going out there, talking, learning on your own, figuring out what resources you need, meeting people, being extroverted and just like get connecting to people who can kind of help you or advise you.
Okay.
So that really helps you kind of crystallize your vision that way as you start to fill those gaps.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I like that in regards to and you stand out, your how you stand out, and then also identifying the areas in which you're lacking so that you can then grow in those areas or bring in other people to help kind of cover your areas that you are lacking, but
Hmm.
continuing to maintain that growth mindset and gaining mentors along the way. So
Hmm.
let me ask you one question that I like to ask all of my guests. If you're to be handed $1 million today with no restrictions attached to it, how would you invest that in your business or another endeavor and why?
Right. We have a lot of plans that we're working towards that I could easily
Yep.
like sink that into, which is, we want to take the next step with our project and make connected worlds to eco. There's other
Okay.
worlds that you can travel between and connect to. So that would be kind of
Yep.
the obvious one. And that's the path we're already kind of on. But if this is just like $1 million from heaven, I can spend on
Hmm.
whatever I want. I might try some other projects that I've been interested in, like other games that I've wanted to try. I really
Okay.
love this idea of like, online places that have their life of their own. So
Yeah.
like you watch like Game of Thrones, and this world has such a reality to it, right?
Right.
That should be a video game with real people. Like, and it's not
Okay.
just a story. It's like it's happening because people like own the villages and the castles, and the kings are like actual people having these wars. Like, I
Yeah.
want that place to exist. So
Right.
I think I would, yeah, if $1 million from heaven, I would probably just start something like that.
Okay. I like it. I like it, John. Now, if anyone wants to find out more about the work that you're doing, have done, and to continue to do, what's the best way for someone to connect with you?
Yeah, you can just follow me on Twitter or LinkedIn,
Okay.
or shoot me an email too.
Okay. All right. So John, and then we're going to put it in the show notes. So we'll make sure that people have the correct spelling, but Krajewski, Krajewski.
That's right.
All right. Well, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate this conversation. It's definitely an area that there is a big market for people to be operating in. So I love to see that you chase that passion, had the support from your family to continue to push forward into it.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Zach, and yeah, great talking to you.
Absolutely. I look forward to seeing what you continue to do. Take
Awesome.
care.
See ya.